Number one is the security situation, but they're so intertwined, they're so codependent that we don't have the luxury of first winning the war or whatever, fixing the security situation and then dealing with reforms. It's not just the parallel processes. In many ways, the reforms process is the prerequisite of our ability to fight back, to survive, to prevail, and to defend ourselves and the others. So that is why it's so very much important to both continue helping Ukraine on the front line with weapons, with the means to win kinetically and physically, but also helping Ukraine transform really into the most effective and the most democratic country in order to sort of really do that.
Hello. This week on The Edge, we're going to be discussing reforms as Ukraine tries to break away from the legacy of Moscow's imperialism and towards a more European style of society. Our guest is Mykhailo Zhernakov. He's a former judge in the Zaporizhia region here. In 2016, he helped to create the De Jure Foundation. We'll leave a link down below. It's an NGO focusing on improvements to the legal system and anti-corruption efforts. Because even while the war rages all around us, there is concurrently a very strong desire in this nation for change. When we talk about where those changes are most needed, and realistically what can be achieved as Ukraine tries to direct itself into a far brighter future once the shooting stops, and how to combat an enemy that is just as insidious and dangerous as perhaps the Russians themselves. So, Mykhailo, thank you very much for joining us. We very much appreciate it. I know your time is limited, so we're going to get right into it.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's absolutely our pleasure. This is an important topic. Your emphasis is on legal reform. What is the current state of the legal system in Ukraine? Where are these reforms needed the most?
We're getting there, but we're still not there. Say the judiciary, which is our main focus, is one of the least trusted public institutions still in the country. And that's because people see quite a bit of corruption still. People see dependence on politicians and whatnot. And they see deficiencies in the system. It's the system that we inherited from the Soviet Union and actually never had any successful sort of reboot, any big reform that would bring us, the judges that are compatible with what Ukraine is now, right? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of lagging behind quite a bit. It's a remnant. It's a leftover from what we had from the state and the country that we used to have. And this is a part of the country that is still with us, but it's very much incompatible again with what we are now. So that is why we have to transform quite a bit. We have to. Which is getting rid of old corrupt judges, hiring new, better ones, new rules, transparency, anti-corruption measures, and so on and so on. In institutional safeguards from political interference, all these kind of things. So it's a set of rules. It's a lot about HR. It's about hiring, firing, and so on. It's about building institutions, judiciary and otherwise, because you can't have a good legal system. You can't have rule of law when you just have somehow very good judiciary, but very poor bar and very poor prosecution. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. So we have to transform all the things altogether. We've already done quite a bit. And by we, I mean the country in general. The civil society is a strong player in it. But we still have to transform still more than we have achieved. But we're on the right track.
Well, because I don't think my audience may understand exactly the difference between what is called like Byzantine law, kind of this law that originates, this legal system that originates from Moscow, which is very dense. The legal code itself is often contradictory. It's built to be obscure and
in a way,
easily kind of manipulated by the powerful and all the rest of it. I've had my run-in with the Ukrainian legal system here when
what's your experience?
Well, my apartment was burgled once, so I was the victim of a crime.
Yeah.
And so that I got introduced to the Ukrainian legal system, the criminal judicial system, and I was shocked at how kind of just overwrought with like everything has to be notarized and in triplicate and this legal form, that legal form. It just seemed to be never ending. And I also, when I lived in Moscow, saw something similar when we would do things like contract law. So can you explain to my audience the difference between an Eastern Moscow kind of style legal code as opposed to what we have in the West?
Look, we have there's a lot of usually the division that we have here, or the difference that was this continental law. If you're looking at Europe, right, and there's this English law, right, and they go like, oh, we gotta have this and that, this precedent, there's this. So there's some difference, and people sometimes go like, oh, we'd rather adopt that one because that one works. It's not about the peculiarities of the system or its historic roots. It's about whether it works or not. It's about whether it serves the people or not. And that very much still lies in who is the judge that's adjudicating. It's very much in the law itself. Of course, it has to be non-contradictory. It has to be clear. It has to give people legal certainty. It has to have certain set of things to it that work. But again, in the end, it's whether it works or not. But I think you're right in a way that by design, the Moscow, the Russian system is, and especially during, I think it was exacerbated and then sort of reinvented during Stalin times. Vyshinsky was his prosecutor general, who sort of ideologist behind this all. That as opposed to the liberal Western tradition, where we have rights because we have rights since our birth by sole existence, right? By
inalienable human rights.
Exactly. There we go. Basically, the notion, the idea is that the rights is something that the state gives to you, and so it can take it back, right? Or so it can do whatever the hell they want with your rights and with you as a person. So that's basically
because any rights that you get rights by achieving them, by gaining power or wealth.
or because somebody voted that you can do this now. So not really. It's your inalienable rights, isn't it?
That's right.
That's where we want to.
Very different mentality.
Absolutely, yes. And that's where we want to go, and that's where we belong, because you can see, Ukraine in many dimensions shows once and once again that we are, democratic, that we value human life, that we want freedom, and it's a very dear thing to us, and so on and so on. That we're liberal in our not in a political, sort of ideology sense, but in a legal philosophy sense, that we believe in human rights. We believe in the Western tradition much more than otherwise. But we unfortunately were for a long time under Soviet, before that Russian occupation, and they imposed this system on us, and we still have, in many ways, both legal in terms of the norms, the rules that are entrenched in the laws, and in tradition in terms of legacy, in terms of the judges, their mentality, on the prosecutors, and so on, that have this sort of still tradition and this idea that they're here to sort of exercise ultimate and unlimited power, and you're insignificant and you can't do much if they don't allow you. So that's something that we want to, and we're trying to run away from.
And I'm going to ask you questions about that before I move away from this idea of the difference in kind of a legal code and a legal judiciary system. How much of this is important for Ukraine's integration into the West?
Fundamental.
And can you do it? Can you make the changes to the legal code?
We have to. First of all, we have to make these changes, but it's not only about changing the law itself. It's implementing the change, right?
Yeah.
It's building the system that works, that provides these rights, the protection of these rights, the free market, the property that you can rights that you can defend in the court, that you can and so on and so on. Because without that, you can't have economy, right? Can you? If we look at the polls on main obstacles to foreign direct investment, you get time and time again every year we're getting lack of trust in the courts, problems with the rule of law system, and so on. Now, even not all the polls that are now during the big scale war are about physical. So physical safety is not even in the first place in all of them. It's the absence of rule of law that scares off investors. And without the investments, you can't rebuild, because it's hundreds of billions or trillions or whatever is the number now. The governments don't have this money, so it has to come from private investors. Coming back to whether they will invest or not, that depends largely on the rule of law, because you can have physical solutions to it. You can move it underground, you can do whatever to defend it from a safety, sort of physical safety, kinetic situation, but not from missiles and such and bullets. But you can't defend much from the absence of rule of law if somebody comes and says, "Hey, now it's mine because I have a court decision that I just bought around the corner." There's very little answer to that.
Yeah, I remember how bad it used to be in the early post-Soviet period here in Ukraine.
Oh, God forbid, of course. It was a very different thing.
And then we had Maidan in 2014, and then we had that very odd kind of weird period between 2014 and 2022, where we had things like Shulkin and Burisma, which is what my American audience might, their only reference to the criminality and the law and corruption here might have been that. Talk a little bit about where you've come from, the improvements that have been made from post-Soviet 91 to 14 and then onwards.
Yes. So we and just also finishing on the EU integration. So now it's called fundamental because it's not my word. It's called fundamental cluster in the EU integration path.
Okay.
Things like rule of law, independence of the judiciary, criminal civil proceedings, human rights, and public administration. All this, it's sort of a backbone of the state that has to be there, and you can't really open and close other chapters of the negotiation with the EU. So what it's all about? It's about making our system similar to the one in the other EU countries. So we're one of the
easier to integrate as well.
Not easier. So we're like, so we can integrate. So we're compatible. So we have rule of law and so on. So we absolutely have to have it. Otherwise, no integration in the EU. And some of the countries have been integrated maybe a little bit too early, as we now see that not all of them are good democracies right now, right? So which are doing what they're doing right now. So we don't want to be that. And there's the EU countries that also don't want to see another country that is questionable, and for a good reason. I mean, we have to make the union stronger, not more questionable, and not, God forbid, weaker. So we're there in terms of values. We're there in terms of what the people want and so on. But we have to change this sort of still legacy. We have to deal with it in a way that it doesn't obstruct and it doesn't go against the will of the people, that it protects the people, that protects the others who want to come and invest, that protects the others who come and, God forbid, have some bad experience with whatnot, or have a good experience and want to continue having it, right? So all that requires, sane public administration. All that requires good rule of law system, protection from the state, protection from, and that entails, of course, that means you got to have functioning courts, prosecution, law enforcement agencies, anti-corruption agencies, and whatnot.
Well, I guess that leads me to I actually have this in two separate questions, but the way you've put it already, I'm going to combine them together in that, can this be done, this reform, at a time of war?
Yeah.
And I'm going to combine that with the question of, actually, in order to get European and Western support, these reforms might be absolutely necessary because you need Western support to prosecute the war. So these two questions combined, can these reforms be made at war? And actually, perhaps even the reforms are part of getting support in order to win the war.
Absolutely, yes. Yes to all 2 or 3 or whatever was the number of questions.
The general point I'm trying to make.
Absolutely, yes. First of all, we already have made progress, right? That's answering your previous question, but also combining with this one, and that shows that they're possible. Let's imagine and let's remember that the big war we're now having for 3 and something years. It's before that we had also for 9 years, since 2014 we're in a state of de facto war with Russia, right? Different scales, but still. So all the reforms progress that we have made in the recent years since the Revolution of Dignity was at times of war. Now, of course, when it's harder to do on one hand because it's physical safety and all these things. It's hard to do during war times. It's hard to do because we don't have elections, right? And we have the parliament that is already here for 6 years almost, and the president as well, and the parliament is tired. It's harder to push through the laws and so on. Not to say, God forbid, to echo Russian propaganda that Zelensky is illegitimate or the parliament is illegitimate. It is legitimate. It's all in the constitution. It's in the laws. If we cannot have, for obvious reasons, we cannot have elections during the war, the big scale war, large scale war that is happening on our territory.
And martial law was voted on by the Rada legally under the Constitution. Everything that is happening here is legal under the Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about this. Anybody who says that's illegitimate is knowingly or not echoing Russian propaganda. So we can't have elections during big war times, and that puts, of course, a certain limitation because there's no pre-election, there's less accountability, there's the parliament is really tired now. You're getting less and less. It's harder and harder to get votes. All this happens, but also.
And part of your population is living under occupation and isn't able to
There we
vote.
go. Also, physical safety or certain things. Also, you cannot have during martial law, you cannot have certain instruments of advocacy, such as, peaceful rallies, all these kind of things. It's limited. It's not easy, but it's doable. And we have shown, we have progressed so far on the EU integration accession track. At the speed at which no other country that was being accepted progressed. It's light speed at which our government prepared the documents. It's also it may be different on the quality of reforms. There's always discussions. There's always vested interest. I'm not saying it's ideal. God forbid. Now it's also. It's getting harder now because of different dynamics. Because of the Hungarian veto on certain things, including EU accession and so on. But still, it's doable. And certain things, yes, certain aspects you can't really do. That is why we're leaving them for after the martial law, such as the reform of the security service. A big part of it is now on the front lines. If you want to reshuffle this, and that's counterintelligence as well. It's not just the combat units. It's a big and important structure, and you don't want to mess with it while you're at existential big war. But certain things, I don't know, Supreme Court reform or the Prosecutor General selection procedures or the State Bureau of Investigation or others. They're not impossible. We on the contrary, we have shown during this big war that reshuffling, rebooting the judicial governance bodies, the ones that hire and fire judges, the selection of the top anti-corruption prosecutor, a lot of things are possible. Moreover, the demand of the people is increased because they see the injustice, they want more justice,
Mm-hmm.
they're tired of, all this legacy, and they want change to happen fast, and finally that they can defend their rights in full, in courts and otherwise.
Well, now in here we start talking about corruption, because I've repeatedly heard from my Ukrainian friends and associates and contacts that I have that really there are two wars going on. That there's the war against the Russians, and then there's the war against the legacy of Moscow, and that is the corruption here.
Yes.
Just how bad is corruption currently in Ukraine, and what needs to be done about it?
It depends on how you look at it. What measure do you, by what, how do you measure it? You can't measure it with what do you call it?
A ruler?
A ruler, yeah, exactly. Or
a measuring tape?
Exactly. It's your usual instruments. It's more complicated than that. There's a Russian myth that, Ukraine is utterly corrupt and nothing you can do about this. Not true. You could see, on the contrary, not to say it's still very much here, don't take me wrong, but we're building institutions that go in after the people that were already now, that people just several years ago, they were untouchable. The president of the Supreme Court having a $2.7 million bribe just a couple years ago. I mean, it doesn't speak well about the judiciary. And I mean, coming back to what which we started, right? The judiciary is still in a state where these things, unfortunately, are possible. But the discovery is possible because the anti-corruption infrastructure is here. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the investigative agency, the specialized anti-corruption prosecution, the oversight, and the anti-corruption court. That was all built between 2014 and 2018. So just quite recently. And now we have more than 200 verdicts on top corruption cases, ministers, judges, prosecutors, different deputies of different levels, members of the parliament, whatnot. So people who were untouchable before, literally, because the institutions were so weak, you couldn't, they couldn't even think about, prosecuting them. Now we have institutions that can go after anybody. Just recently, the vice prime minister came back from his long business trip to somewhere, and he got a notice of suspicion just right away from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. The current vice prime minister, that's quite a big one, because of something he did on his previous position, but it doesn't matter. It means that the system works, and the system goes after, if they see a problem, they address it, and that's what matters. So we have to, and again, but this is the infrastructure that has been built after the Revolution of Dignity, a small but very effective, and that's targeting top corruption and white collar crime, kind of deputy mayor and higher. So very limited but very important group of people. But there's still the rest. We have to still tackle, the rest. And one more word about the sort of the society, because there's this thought that or this idea that you have to begin, especially I think the corruptioners, the officials, that they like it. It has to change from within. Like we have to change the mentality. We have to change the people, because if people don't want to give bribes, then nobody will take them. No, I'm sorry. Of course, there's, it takes two to tango, but sometimes people didn't have any other option. If it was about medical services, and you come to, and we had this legacy again in the Constitution. It says that all medicine, basically all medical, basically medicine provided to the people should be free, and it wasn't, because there was never enough money to provide for the healthcare for everybody, every medical service, because the Constitution was adopted back in 1996 when socialists and communists were very much still super influential. Then came the reform of the medical services, the healthcare reform, and then so the primary and they changed quite a bit. So now you can legally come to and then change the way the money flows. basically eliminated corruption, inefficiency, and whatnot. And now the doctors get decent salaries, and people can come and get medical services. It's it's not all that, but they have on a basic level they have healthcare, and of course they choose the option where it's legal and non-corrupt when they have the ability to, when it's not life and death, or you have to sort of pay the doctor directly, or you have to buy some medicine and provide while everything is supposedly free. So this is the fallacy. This is the lie in which in many ways Russia still lives. When something is declared and it's not there, and everybody has to pretend it's like it's written in the constitution or wherever it's written. No, we wanna have things. We want to be real. We want to live in the real world. We want to have good healthcare, good legal services, and it's doable. And it's again, when we build the system that works, of course nobody likes corruption. And of course the polls show that overwhelmingly people think corruption is a number one problem, and it has to be tackled. And people very much dislike corruption. People very much want justice and democracy.
I agree, but I also do hear voices in Ukraine that are deeply cynical about anti-corruption. Mm-hmm. That really you're just replacing one corrupt official with another, and they're gonna, instead of one guy abusing his power, mm-hmm. somebody else will come in and abuse his power. And especially if you're going to be giving more power to anti-corruption authorities, that they could then abuse that power. There's that concern. And the cynicism even goes to the point of saying, even when we do have corruption cases, it's all for show, and the real deep corruption. That's how cynical, I'm afraid, some Ukrainians are when it comes to looking at.
We just talked about this at work, because people, and it's natural, I think. First of all, people are angry now, and very much, the general mood is not ideal. Let's put it mildly. Second, if you don't see, these things take time. Even in the ideal scenario, it takes a lot of time to build institutions, then for them to produce. Even if they catch somebody and nobody's obstructing the process, and it still takes years before they get to the verdict. Even sometimes it takes a couple of years in simple cases like bribery. Sometimes grand corruption is about multi-transnational, with like tens and dozens of entities in 12 different countries that transfer money from one to another. That takes a lot of time to mm-hmm. investigate. Of course, if it's transnational, with the other countries and so on, but we're still getting these verdicts. So what I'm trying to say, it may be not obvious to people. People, of course, are dissatisfied generally with the state in many ways because of other things are not moving. But it's the practice shows people like, okay, where do we, if we take this devil's advocate position, right? Okay, it's all for show. Is it all for show that they apprehend the head of the Supreme Court and then he spends time in jail, and or Kolomoisky that is now behind bars, or mm-hmm. The super oligarch? Like, where do we stop? Who's more influential than them? It's very few people in this country. So I mean, it's of course it depends on how you look at it. But if you know what is happening really, then it's not that you start to believe; you just see it happening.
Yeah. Well, how do we change that opinion then? Because I remember when they put that statue up outside the central headquarters in Kiev's police department of the Gaishnik.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when they put that statue up, and everybody was laughing hysterically at them. The attempt was to try to change the opinion, the public opinion of law enforcement, of the law, of how do we change Ukrainians' mentality that there can be, honest to God, legitimate.
I don't think we have to change Ukrainian mentality very much, and so there's this notion that which is not without roots, that Ukrainians are sort of by default are against the government because for centuries, it's true, for centuries we haven't had our own government. So any government was foreign, like the Moscows. Of course, we were skeptical to it, to say the least. At the same time, if we look at the opinion polls now, there is one state institution that people like very much. It's the armed forces. When they see performance at the level where the others come and ready to die for you, and are doing that on a daily basis, there's no problem with trust. It's sky high. It's 90-something% or 80-something%, or it's very high. There are other institutions that also have positive balance when they perform. The problem is with performance, not the public. There is, of course, it's always, everybody has its lens. There's some, public perception is not ideal. But when people see good performance, there's no problem. If people see, the police, beating people for nothing, or not prosecuting corruption or other things, or letting go of, not performing no amount of cool communication and like special, things or statues or action, whatever it is.
Public affairs campaign.
Yeah. No amount of that can change that. If it performs well, then it doesn't really need much advertising.
Because we've even had people on the show who have said that they didn't, like, they were victims of war crimes, and that they were afraid to go to a legal system because entanglement in any – and this is, I think, a layover from Moscow, is that any involvement with the state is a bad thing. You're always going to – as an individual, you want to stay as far away from the state as possible, because if you touch it, you're going to get sucked into it, and it's never going to be good for you. So how do we get Ukrainians to recognize that the law is no longer like it was in Moscow, and you can engage with the legal system and not be at a disadvantage?
Look, the law is all right. I mean, we can improve it because it's always things to improve, but it's the application of the law. That's why it's about building institutions is so important. We first have to do, I mean, it doesn't have to one follow the other. It's just, but the first in the sense of the most important thing is to build the institutions that would follow what is in the law, that wouldn't try to bend the law or the constitution. We don't have the worst constitution, by the way, apart from certain things we talked about, of certain things that the state promised and can deliver. Other than that, it's quite a liberal, and it's quite a strong human right from a standpoint of human rights and the organization of the state constitution. We just have to have the police officers who don't seek bribery and who believe in rule of law, who want to protect human rights. We don't need prosecutors who seek again how to profiteer from the certain case and so on and so on. We started building this. We started rebooting this. But we still have to reboot these agencies to the point where they perform, and that's about it. And then the peculiarities of the law and the certain things that we have to certain anomalies or other things that are not ideal in the text of the law, we can change. Of course, we can work on it, but it's not paramount. And we don't have to change. I don't think we have to change public perception much. Again, if we provide the service at a certain acceptable level, I'm not saying ideal from get-go, no. Then people when people see that it's working, they will use it, and they will be happy.
They need to gain their trust, though.
They need to gain their trust, though. That is why we have to first of all again make them work, and then of course it has to be consistent. So that's about it. And people may be dissatisfied because it's a running joke that, we're getting very quickly, we're getting used to good services. There's no secret that the services in Ukraine, some of them are extremely good, like, the banking or the food and, the bar and so on, and some others, and the e-governance. And then something breaks a little bit. Your money it's not instantly transferred. It's like it takes 3 seconds and everybody's like, oh, come on, nothing works. It's a bad government, and so on. Sometimes it happens. I think it's human more than
it's
Ukrainian.
Human nature. That's everywhere.
So again, make it work. That's a very simple recipe. And it's very much, if we're talking about rule of law institutions, very much about hiring and firing procedures. You have to, make a good selection procedure. And for rule of law institutions, that means now, in this period in time, that means involving independent international experts. Because again, we have good legal experts here, but we have to sort of import the many in many ways we're importing other things from the EU in which we're integrating. We have to import these practices, these standards of integrity and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way, the most effective way of that is to import people who have been working as HRs, of the same, so to say, of the same systems in their respective countries, in the Baltic states, in the Western Europe, in Scandinavia, in North America maybe, and it works like a charm. They come here and it gets very real very soon, and then the competitors come to the competition, and it's not like, tell us if it's somebody's person, somebody's nephew, somebody's whatever. Tell us what you had for breakfast, or what you will do, what will be your priority when you are already prosecutor general or whatever, or the judge of the appellate court. They start asking them real questions about their integrity, about their property, about their this and that, and that's
their associations.
Exactly,
where does your money come from?
And that is what is called a real competition. And these experts can be influenced bad in any way, and so they're delegated by the very respective.
How much of this is generational? How much of this is a holdover from the Soviet? The judges that have been in their seat for 20 years still have that very Soviet mentality, and they just have to be dismissed.
Yes and no. So and
can they be reformed, or do they need to be altogether replaced?
They have to be. You can't teach integrity, can you?
Mm.
So you can teach certain things if you lack certain knowledge or certain skills. That's manageable. You can teach it. You can't teach if somebody decided that they will take bribes and that's the way to live, and their number one priority is getting rich. You can't reprogram that easy. No, and practice shows that it's nearly impossible to get somebody who been working there for like 30 years and taking bribes, and somehow miraculously they're now a good person and therefore rule of law. No, so that is why these people have to be replaced. Absolutely,
mm-hmm.
There's no other way. And this is what the rule of law reforms are very much about right now in Ukraine. So take a commission, take a look at them, their profile, their track record. If something is off, especially when it's obviously off, goodbye. We take another one. We put somebody in your place who makes it better, who doesn't have obvious, dents in their reputation or integrity concerns.
How concerned are you that might also, though, invite people who are seeking political favor or personal favor?
Mm-hmm.
You cull somebody and replace them with.
Oh, it always invites it. There's always somebody who wants to put their person, like, I don't know, an oligarch, or there's fewer oligarchs and they're less influential now in Ukraine, but they still exist. Big business people, high political figures. Of course, it was like this for a while. People used to have like their own judges or clans or this or that.
Right.
Yeah, if if you know them and trust them and they're good, they win the competition. If their only virtue is knowing you personally
and having
and it's obvious, and then maybe, and it just happens so, if they're very much politically connected, then they, in their previous capacities, have acquired certain houses and cars and whatnot that are, can't be easily explained, then we have a problem. That is why real competitions matter.
And you're confident that this can happen. I mean, we in a country like America, we're seeing problems with the judiciary as well. I mean, this is not limited to just Ukraine. How optimistic are you that you can actually make things better?
In terms of technical, I am very optimistic because I've seen it happen. Again, anti-corruption court, the best selection we had so far. Why? 6 out of 6 people that were selected in the judges of the anti-corruption court were independent international experts. Well, not selected technically; they were it's analyzing their integrity. So it's something off with integrity, you're out of the competition. And we now have again the best judicial selection. We have 200 plus verdicts on very top profile bad people many of whom are now behind bars. In terms of how whether it happens politically, whether we will have reformed everything, we will reform everything and get in the EU and whatnot, we still have to achieve that. We still have to have resolve. We still have to overcome these vested interests that are inside the country. We still have to overcome this opposition of the system that is very pro status quo, obviously, and so on. So we don't have to. We have to not lose our focus here. Let's put it this way.
Well, just one last question, because I know you need to run.
Mm-hmm.
You're a very busy man, but America and the West, America in particular, but also Western nations aside, have looked at Ukraine for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of their major concerns about providing support for Ukraine is the issue of corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And abuse of the law.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say to an international audience to reassure them that maybe you're not there yet, or maybe you are,
mm-hmm.
but how do you reassure an international audience that indeed Ukraine is aiming to get to a place where business, law, stability, all of those things can be maintained?
When it comes to arms assistance and the arms that have been provided to Ukraine, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've seen a single round being sold on maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean...
well, if that were to come out, there would be hell to pay in Ukraine. The Ukrainian
absolutely,
people
but whatever Russian propaganda tried to portray that, Abrams tanks and whatnot and launchers and doesn't happen. So that's safe. We have a system and it's very. Let me tell you, I can't. First of all, I don't know very much about it, but the things I know, let me tell you, there are systems that how to track them and how to not let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we can handle it. We can handle many things on the front line, as you can see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that, again, it's all ideal. That's why we have to continue transforming. Also because we have units that are, I don't know, the best in the world probably right now. We're inventing things as they go. The warfare itself, we were writing it because of the drones and this and that and what is happening on our front lines. And there are some remnants, of course, there are some remnants of the army that are still very much Soviet-like that we have to still transform. And we have to implement new rules in terms of transparency of the procurement in both lethal and non-lethal and so on and so forth. Things are moving. Some things are moving. Some things are moving not at the speed with which they should be moving.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have to. So the international community that is providing help to Ukraine should, of course, also help Ukraine transform these rules, these increased transparency, merit-based selections, all this. And it has to come in order for us to be the most effective, because we need to survive in order for the others also to survive. Because let's be honest, it's not just our existential war. It's very much about security in Europe, to say the least, but it's very much about the democracy in the whole world, isn't it?
And without the rule of law, there can be no democracy.
It's not. So there's also one more thing, maybe before I go. There's also this, I think, misplaced idea or notion that reforms are important, of course, but not as which is true. I mean, number one is a security situation, but they're so intertwined, they're so codependent that we don't have the luxury of first winning the war or whatever, fixing the security situation and then dealing with reforms. It's not just the parallel processes. In many ways, the reforms process is the prerequisite of our ability to fight back, to survive, to prevail, and to defend ourselves and the others. So that is why it's so very much important to both continue helping Ukraine on the front line with weapons, with the means to win kinetically and physically, but also helping Ukraine transform really into the most effective and the most democratic country in order to sort of really do that.
Yes, well, absolutely, and that's why we're here in Kiev to support you in that effort. So
thank you very much for that, and thank you for the whole democratic world for supporting Ukraine. This means the world to us, but it also means the world to the world. I hope.
I agree 100%. Mykhailo Zhernakov, I
thank you very
appreciate
much.
your time, and thank you for coming and talking to us.
Thanks for having me.